Hi everyone, it's Daniel Twain here from Armchair Logic, where we try to bring logic to mysticism and the world. I know this is a touchy subject and it may ruffle some feathers, but I really think it needs to be said. I was hanging out with some friends and we were talking about where is Black Lives Matter? Where did it go? What happened? There was so much controversy around it a couple of years ago, and ever since the pandemic, it seems that it disappeared. And maybe this is not true. Maybe, everything is still going full steam, but we don't hear about it as much. So I brought up the fact that, every so many years, the powers that be, or the government, or the propaganda machine, introduce these very divisive issues into the population that serve to divide us and fight each other. It's a distraction, so that we're at war with our neighbors instead of the government, in my opinion. So we talked about the abortion rights used to be a big issue. Now it's black and white. It could be the wall. It could be immigrants. It can be gay or straight. There's all these issues that seem to pop up and then disappear. And they sink into our consciousness and they create a sense of division. And, plus the involvement of George Soros in Black Lives Matter when it first came around, and then it kind of died down, and then the last, couple of years ago, it got really strong again. It's just interesting where this is coming from, and that it's not so grassroots, that there are big people behind that cause. And not that it isn't necessary or isn't a good cause, but I think it might be a little bit manipulated in order to get us mad at each other. So in this conversation, I was bringing these issues up, and a friend of mine said, a white guy said that I couldn't understand because I was experiencing white privilege, and I couldn't understand the plight of black people in America. And right away, when we label someone with a label as white, privileged, or whatever the label is, we automatically discredit everything else they have to say. It's a very immature tactic when you are trying to engage in a debate. And it's one that people use a lot. For instance, say I had a friend with a couple of kids and I saw them abusing them or treating them in an unkind way. And so I bring it up to my friend and say, I noticed this, are things okay, or what's going on? And they say something like, if I was childish or childless or gay or something, they would say, well, you don't understand because you're single and you don't have kids. Or you don't understand because you're gay and you don't have kids. So right away, that discredits anything else I have to say. Even if the abuse is abusive and I see it, like I don't understand parental abuse because I don't have kids. So I hope that's a good example. You can see that when we label someone, automatically they're discredited and their point of view becomes null and void. So speaking to the accusation that I have white privilege, I am my mother was a first generation Italian from southern Italy, very, very far south in Italy. They were dirt poor, came over on the boat, the typical scene. And, my grandfather was the garbage man. on horse, and he had a horse and carriage, and was the garbage man. And my mother talked about living on rabbits and possums, and they even would eat crows. They were very hungry. And then my grandfather joined the war effort, and that's how they became citizens and bettered their lives a bit. So I wouldn't call that white privilege. And my other side of my family, my father's side, were poor Irish people who lived through the potato famine when England tried to starve the Irish to death. They barely made it out, both of them as young children. They were both adopted in America by a family. They grew up together and then got married, my grandmother and grandfather. They weren't related, but they grew up as orphans in the United States. We're dirt poor. My father talked about growing up, and my grandfather actually joined the Navy and became a career Navy man. But the pay was so small that my dad would go after a coal truck and try and get pieces of coal that would fall off the truck so that they could have heat or cook or whatever they needed. So I didn't come from a privileged family, and I don't think many white Americans come from privileged slave-owning histories. It's very, very rare that anyone in the South could actually afford to have slaves. Most white people in the South were poor. Very, very few people could afford slaves. So to discount someone as being just because of their skin color and assuming they have white privilege, and maybe because I'm white that translates into me having doors opened for me, that's very possible. Maybe there are advantages to walking in as just looking white than it does walking in and looking black. So that could be true. But to say that, I have this privilege, this inbred privilege, is untrue. It's really untrue as far as my family history goes and how they struggled. And, if a door gets open because we're white, yeah, we need to work on that. We know there's racism. We know that there are systemic issues around race. You can go to the justice.gov website and look up all of I remember back in the 90s, I think it was the San Jose Mercury News did a big story about the CIA bringing drugs into the inner city in Los Angeles and Chicago. And the people knew it in Los Angeles, in the inner city. They knew that this was happening. They knew the CIA was funneling crack cocaine into the inner city in Los Angeles, South Central. And they would go to city hall meetings and demand that this be investigated for years, and they didn't do anything until this guy wrote this article and uncovered the fact that the CIA in Nicaragua and there were trials and everything. This was a huge story where the CIA was actually funneling crack cocaine they were a big cog in that wheel, which destroyed so many lives in Los Angeles. It's criminal. And the story happened, and then it was over. Oliver North went on trial. A few people, got a slap on the wrist, and it just disappeared. When you think of the gravity of something that diabolically evil, and yet I don't think many people even know that story. Look it up. You can read all about it. It was terrible. And, this kind of stuff doesn't stop. I mean, we know all about the syphilis experiments done on poor African American people. We know that this happens, but it seems mostly centered around the government. I mean, look at Nancy Pelosi's parties. There's video of her parties, and all the servants are of color. I think we just need to direct this fight towards the real enemy and not each other, and start calling each other names and start assuming that certain things come with being white or certain things come with being black. And certain things a lot of white people feel are part and parcel with being black, like being a criminal or being a drug dealer or being a gang member, because that's all we see. The media floods us with black crime. When there's tons of white crime, there's tons of white on white crime, there's tons of cops killing white people. But we never hear it. There's no balance. And that's a concerted effort. That's a propaganda effort. And I believe that certain sections of society are held down because they don't want everyone in the workforce. There aren't enough jobs. There aren't enough ways to make a living. So they keep people in a state of dependency. And that's a criminal endeavor. And we know in impoverished neighborhoods, there's more liquor stores. There are less ways to get healthy food. Fast food is on every corner. These are designed to keep people in poverty and to keep people dependent and to keep their minds dull. So I think, racism exists. It certainly does. And it's horrifying when you think about the real people behind it. So I just wanted to put this out there and it's not your neighbor. It's not your white friends. It's not, the people you work with. It is a bigger problem than that. And they keep us fighting each other. They keep us mad at each other. I mean, the KKK, who even says that anymore? It's so old school, so backwards that nobody even gives it any credit anymore. It really is. I mean, that's pretty dead. We have to admit. That's not what we're fighting here. So it's switched now to police brutality, which, of course needs to be challenged and needs to be better displayed or better trained. The cops need to be better trained in these issues. Of course, it always has to get better. But to start calling people names or classifying each other as white or black and demeaning other people based on the color of their skin, because racism goes both ways. There are white racists and there are black racists. It's not exclusive to white people or white Europeans. But like I said, my European ancestors never owned slaves in their home country or here. And, if we want to go way back, everyone has been enslaved at some point. I mean, even the English were enslaved by the Moors. The English, there were, I think it was in Spain or Northern Africa, where they would capture English people and keep them as slaves, and people in England would put together huge fundraisers in order to buy these English people back from the Moors. So, or we could talk about the Egyptians, or we can talk about the slave trade in the Native American communities, or the Aztecs. There were slaves throughout history. So somewhere down the line, we've probably all been a slave at some point. And that's not to diminish, America's slave history. It's not to say, well, we've all been there kind of thing, but we have. It's somewhere down the line. And, I just hope that we can come together as people and peacefully, change a lot of the race relations that we have in the United States. Try to work together and instead of letting the government manipulate us and turn us against each other, turn us inward instead of outward, where the real foundation of racism lies. So again, I thank you for your time, and I hope you'll join me again soon. Bye.